Before there were books, there were secrets. Welcome to the Library of Secrets.
Winter, 1942. The German Sixth Army is trapped, starving, and freezing. Once hailed as unstoppable, now they beg for mercy. This is the Battle of Stalingrad, the turning point of World War II, and Adolf Hitler's most fatal mistake. By the summer of 1942, Nazi Germany stood at the peak of its power. The Blitzkrieg had steamrolled through Poland, shattered France, and carved deep into Soviet territory. Hitler's armies had conquered vast lands in just a few short years. But now, his attention shifted south. His goal, to seize the rich oil fields of the Caucasus, the fuel needed to power the German war machine. Along the way stood a city that bore the name of his greatest rival, Joseph Stalin. That city was Stalingrad. At first, Stalingrad held little military importance. It was just another city on the Volga River. But to Hitler and Stalin, it quickly became symbolic, a matter of ego, propaganda, and pride. Neither man could afford to lose a city that carried such a loaded name. Hitler ordered the German Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, to take it at all costs. What followed was not a swift victory, but a slow, grinding conflict, a brutal war of attrition, where every street, every building, and every soldier became a piece in a deadly game of survival. The German offensive began in August 1942. The Luftwaffe bombed Stalingrad relentlessly, turning the city into smoldering ruins. Buildings collapsed, factories burned, and civilians fled or perished. But what was meant to clear the way for German troops became a strategic blunder. That rubble, the broken bones of the city, became the Soviets' greatest weapon. It gave defenders cover, camouflage, and the upper hand in close-quarters fighting. The ruins swallowed tanks, confused formations, and turned the advance into a nightmare. Inside the shattered city, Soviet soldiers fought like ghosts. Every street, every wall, and even the sewers became battlegrounds. Snipers like Vasily Zaitsev hunted from hidden nests, eliminating German officers and spreading fear. Combat was no longer about gaining ground, it was about surviving the next building. Soldiers clashed at knife range, sometimes in the same building, one floor apart. This was no ordinary battle, it was a meat grinder. The Germans, trained for fast, open warfare, were dragged into a slow, brutal fight they weren't prepared for. But while the German Sixth Army bled in the streets of Stalingrad, a bigger strategy was unfolding. Soviet High Command, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, had been quietly massing troops and supplies outside the city. Their plan was bold, not to break the siege, but to crush the attackers entirely. The German flanks were dangerously thin, held by less experienced Romanian and Hungarian divisions. And Stalin's generals knew it. But while the German Sixth Army bled in the streets of Stalingrad, a bigger strategy was unfolding. Soviet High Command, led by Marshal Georgy Zhukov, had been quietly massing troops and supplies outside the city. Their plan was bold, not to break the siege, but to crush the attackers entirely. The German flanks were dangerously thin, held by less experienced Romanian and Hungarian divisions. And Stalin's generals knew it. Despite the disaster unfolding, Hitler ordered General Paulus to fight to the last man. Supplies were flown in, but it was never enough. The temperatures plunged to -30 degrees. Ammunition was nearly gone. Starvation and frostbite spread through the frozen ruins. Inside the encircled city, soldiers were dying faster than they could be saved. The once proud German Sixth Army was collapsing from within. By January 1943, the Red Army was closing in. On January 31, Friedrich Paulus, newly promoted to Field Marshal, defied Hitler's orders and surrendered. He became the first German Field Marshal in history to do so. A week later, the last pockets of resistance fell. Of the 300,000 Axis troops trapped in Stalingrad, only 91,000 were taken prisoner, and most of them would never return home. The Battle of Stalingrad marked a decisive turning point in World War II. For the first time, Nazi momentum was broken. Hitler's forces, once unstoppable, were now in retreat. The Soviet Red Army, hardened by brutal street fighting and bitter cold, began its relentless push west, all the way toward Berlin. From this point on, the tide of war had shifted, and the world would never be the same. The human cost was staggering. Over 2 million people, soldiers and civilians, were killed, wounded, or captured. Stalingrad remains one of the deadliest battles in recorded history. But beyond the numbers, it proved something far more powerful, that no army, no matter how feared or glorified, is invincible. Hitler's pride and his fatal underestimation of the Soviet spirit would ultimately cost him the war. History isn't just dates and maps, it's about decisions, mistakes, and the people caught in between. If you want more untold stories of war and strategy, subscribe and join us in uncovering the battles that shaped our world. This was the Battle of Stalingrad. What battle should we cover next?